A MAGA resignation over the war in Iran. President Trump says Joe Kent, a top counterterrorism official, was weak. More on the conflict there and here. Texas Republican Senator Ted Cruz on the standoff over Homeland Security funding, Trump's push for voter ID requirements, and the war in Iran. Gas and oil prices continue their steady march upward. Inflation fears intensify. One of our favorite economic thinkers, Justin Wolfers, joins us. Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Let me welcome you to the Takeout. Joe Kent and Cyrus Vance, people with different temperaments and ideologies from different eras. Nevertheless, they have a few things in common that are important. Both served the United States military during times of war. Both served in high government posts. Both resigned in protest over U.S. policy in Iran. Joe Kent is a MAGA conservative and in the headlines today. Cyrus Vance was an Ivy League liberal who was in the headlines in 1979. Interestingly, these timeframes neatly bracket this nation's modern, tortured relationship with Iran. You see, before 1979, Iran was a U.S. Cold War ally, a government to whom we sent arms as a hedge against the Soviets. We knew that government then was aligned with us because we toppled the one in Tehran that wasn't in 1953. For more on that bit of history, just Google Mohammad Mossadegh and the Shah of Iran, Reza Pahlavi. Now, back to Kent and Vance. Kent resigned today as head of the U.S. Counterintelligence Center, saying he could not, in good conscience, that's a quote, support the war in Iran because the regime, quote, posed no imminent threat, unquote, to America. Kent also alleged the U.S. started the war due to pressure from Israel. Kent's statement went on repeatedly to blame Israel for the Iran war and even the Iraq war, a conflict in which Kent served. Kent resigned, therefore, in protest. Cyrus Vance was President Carter's Secretary of State. When the Shah of Iran faced internal dissent in 1978, Vance urged reforms to accommodate more human rights. His rival within Carter's administration, National Security Advisor Zbigniew Brzezinski, advised the Shah to crack down harder. These mixed signals left the Shah, by this time weakened by cancer and other ailments, confused and indecisive. The Shah fled Iran in early 1979 and finally received medical care in America in October of that year. The Islamic Revolution was well underway by November of 1979 when pro-revolutionary protesters stormed the U.S. Embassy and seized 66 U.S. hostages. While the hostage crisis dragged on, in the end, 52 Americans were held for 444 days. President Carter contemplated military rescue efforts. Vance lobbied for diplomacy, and he resigned in protest over a launched but ultimately aborted U.S. military rescue mission. The Islamic Revolution and the hostage crisis set the U.S. and Iran on a collision course that has lasted 47 years, culminating, if you will, in this war and Kent's resignation today. Joe Kent and Cyrus Vance, different people to be sure, but nevertheless bookends to U.S. history, contemporary history with Iran. For the latest on the war, we turn now to Charlie Daggett, who joins us from Tel Aviv. Charlie, a broad question. Summarize the day.
Wow. Okay, Major. First of all, I think we have to talk about Ali Larijani. It's a big question. There's a lot that's gone on. So we have to talk about Ali Larijani. This is the person who's been in charge of Iran's security forces. He was, as the military here calls it, eliminated. They use that word very specifically. He was eliminated. Why this is important? Because this is the person who is in charge of the bloody crackdown on demonstrators in Iran a couple of months ago, which kind of was a precursor for what we're seeing here now. But he was also, because there's been an elimination, to use Israel's word, of top leadership in Iran, he's been responsible for a lot of the attacks here in Israel with Revolutionary Guard forces, attacks against the United States, a significant attack, or at least an attempted attack against the U.S. Embassy overnight inside Baghdad, and certainly attacks that we've seen here. And I have to tell you, Major, the United States and the Israeli military keep saying that they have been able to decimate, I think is one of the words that they use, decimate Iran's capability of launching missiles and rockets into this country, along with Iranian-backed proxy Hezbollah in Lebanon. It has continued. It was a very noisy night and weekend, and we had more air raid sirens going off tonight. We went to an Israeli military base this afternoon, and there were missiles and launches toward that area, too, where we had to take cover. And we went to a place where they were showing us one of the missile launchers that the United States and Israel have both been trying to use these interceptors to take care of these incoming rockets there. And even as we were at that Israeli military base, the alarm sirens went off again, and we had to take cover. Not necessarily take cover, but we certainly had to put ourselves against a cement barrier because of incoming.
And Charlie, this appears to be part of a systematic effort, both on the United States, but specifically the Israelis, to take out known significant regime figures and any who might be successors.
Yes.
And with Larijani's death,
right,
elimination, to use the Israeli term, that appears to be continuing apace.
Yeah, Major, that is a very important point, because we were here before this conflict began, and we were asking how the Israelis were getting their sort of intelligence. And this is before the Israelis. And I say the Israelis because the Israelis have been at the forefront of this, not the Americans, in taking out regime leaders and compounds, et cetera, when after the supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, including top-ranking members of the Iranian leadership and government and regime targets there. Where do you get that information? They're using humans, as they call it, human intelligence. They're getting across electronic wires. They're eavesdropping, et cetera, et cetera. That is how they've been able to pinpoint these, what the military would call high-value targets. What happened today is significant, partly because what we're talking about is leadership that is not only responsible for the crackdown on demonstrators, again, one of the triggers of what we may be seeing here, but also guiding and directing the attacks across this region. That doesn't mean taking out this leadership means that's going to stop, because that had already been done at a very high level, yet the attacks continue. And as I said, we're seeing that from Iran. We're seeing it from Hezbollah, Iran's proxies in Iraq, across the region, striking targets, and United Arab Emirates here in Israel. That continues. Slowed down, it kind of goes through ebbs and flows, but it still continues.
Charlie Daggett, as always, deeply appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ted Cruz joins us now, Republican senator from Texas. Senator, always good to have you on the program. I appreciate it. There's been some reaction on Capitol Hill today to the resignation of Joe Kent, top counterterrorism official within the administration. What's yours?
Well, listen, if any official in the administration disagrees with the national security policies of the president, he or she should resign. And Mr. Kent apparently vigorously disagreed with the president's decision. I think President Trump was exactly right to act to protect America and protect America from the threats posed by Iran. The reason President Trump launched this military attack on Iran is because for 47 years, Iran has been the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism. The Iranian regime has killed nearly 1,000 Americans. They provided over 90% of the funding to Hamas, to Hezbollah, to the Houthis, and the Ayatollah, who is no longer with us, not once but twice, hired hitmen to try to murder President Trump. And so President Trump, as commander-in-chief, made the resolute decision to act to protect Americans, to keep Americans safer. Mr. Kent apparently disagreed with that, and so if that's the case, resignation was the right course of action.
Senator, as you well know, Kent's resignation letter touched on something that has created some divisions within the MAGA or America First movement, that Israel inordinately either pressured or talked the president into this conflict. I'd like you to evaluate that.
So I actually think there are very few divisions. There are a few loudmouth commentators. There are people like Tucker Carlson, who has become the most rabidly anti-Israel commentator, ostensibly on the right. He also has become one of the leading defenders of Iran. He has been a vocal defender of Islamists. He has defended Hamas, said he didn't think they were a terrorist organization. Tucker Carlson has suggested we should apologize to the family of Osama bin Laden. I think those are extreme positions. That is not where Republicans are. That is not where conservatives are. Republicans are overwhelmingly standing with President Trump. And just because Tucker Carlson and a handful of other mouthpieces online decide to embrace a radical isolationist view that is deeply anti-Israel and that is an apologist for radical Islamists, it doesn't mean that's where the voters are. I think the voters, and the polling shows this, at least on the Republican side of the aisle, are overwhelmingly, nearly 90%, standing with President Trump because he's acting boldly to keep America safe.
Do you want to name check anyone else on that side in addition to Tucker Carlson?
Oh, listen, there are plenty. Tucker, I think, has been the most vocal. He's been the most harmful. I said last week, I think Tucker Carlson is the most dangerous demagogue in America. And I do think the poison they're spreading, it is getting some purchase with young people, with teenagers and 20-somethings. And I think it is an obligation of all of us to stand up and speak out. Look, I've also been vocal that I'm concerned about efforts to divide faithful Catholics from evangelical Christians, Protestants. I think that Catholics and Protestants standing together has been really the foundation of the conservative movements for many decades. And those who are seeking to sow dissension are really, their ultimate end is to see the Democrats win, to see the conservative coalition fractured. That'd be tragic for America. I don't think it's going to happen. And I think those who are spending money trying to make that happen are very likely enemies of the United States, are nations like Qatar and China and Russia and others, I think, that are spending real money trying to damage America. But I think America is a lot stronger than a bunch of bots online.
And, Senator, I'm going to get into the SAVE Act and a couple of other issues, but one last thing on Iran. You might have heard Charlie D'Agata talking about two other significant people within the Iranian regime eliminated. That's the Israeli term. War is a blunt instrument, so let me ask you a blunt question. Can the U.S. and Israel, in tandem or separately, kill their way to regime change?
Look, I believe the objective here should be to collapse this regime. Why? Because this regime has been waging war with America for 47 years. As I said, they've killed nearly 1,000 Americans, and they are actively spending money. The Biden administration flowed over $100 billion to the Ayatollah, who would lead mobs chanting death to America. That made no sense. President Trump is taking a very simple position, which is if you are killing Americans, if you continue trying to kill Americans, the commander-in-chief is going to act to stop you. Now, we are not going to see a scenario where we see hundreds of thousands of American troops on the ground for an extended period of time. Iran is not Iraq. However, if we see this regime fall, if we see Iran have a government that is no longer led by a radical Islamist who wants to murder Americans and is actively murdering Americans, that will be a dramatic national security improvement for the United States. And I think that's why the president is acting. I think that's also why Israel is acting. Both are acting in their self-defense.
Is that worth boots on the ground?
The president has made clear that we're not going to see extended boots on the ground. I could envision an operation, perhaps something like what we saw in Venezuela, where there was Delta Force went in a 2-hour incursion, took on opposing fire, took out about 100 Cuban soldiers and apprehended Maduro and his wife, brought him back for federal charges and prosecution for being a narco-terrorist. By the way, that likewise made America much safer. I could envision limited boots on the ground for a specific objective, but I think the chance of anything like an extended occupation, the chances of that are zero.
Let's talk about what's before the Senate right now, the so-called Save America Act.
Yeah.
If enacted, it would require a birth certificate or a passport. Why not have a driver's license, which is a much more common, much more universal form of identification to meet this standard? Well,
because particularly Democrat states give driver's licenses to illegal aliens. And the Save America Act has two requirements, both of which are simple common sense. One, you have to demonstrate American citizenship to register to vote. That's just the first time. And two, when you show up to vote, you have to have a photo ID. Now, Major, the overwhelming majority of Americans support those common sense provisions. Let's take photo ID. 81% of Americans support requiring a photo ID to vote. Interestingly, 75% of African Americans support requiring a photo ID to vote. Over 80% of Hispanics support requiring a photo ID to vote. And here's an amazing statistic. 70% of Democrats nationwide support requiring a photo ID to vote. So why are the Democrats doing everything they can to stop the Save America Act? And I believe the reason is they want illegal aliens who are here to vote illegally. We saw Joe Biden open our borders and allow 12 million illegal immigrants to flood into this country. And we are seeing the Senate Democrats, everyone but John Fetterman, line up and say they will die on the battle lines to prevent basic common sense election integrity legislation. I think that's unfortunate. I think it's bad for democracy and bad for America.
One last thing on this legislation, Senator. It would also dramatically scale back mail-in voting. 28 states use no-excuse mail-in balloting. 8 states ballot that way entirely. Many red states use no-excuse mail-in balloting. No one's clamoring for that. Why is that in there?
Let me tell you where I think the abuses are. We see blue states, states like California, that send out unsolicited mail-in ballots. They just mail ballots to everybody, and you end up having people who aren't there, people who are dead, getting mail-in ballots, and that invites voter fraud. I think we should ban unsolicited mail-in ballots. I also think we should ban ballot harvesting, which is the corrupt practice we see in states like California. Ballot harvesting is where a political operative handles the ballot of another voter, and it invites voter fraud. And by the way, let's say you're listening and you think, well, this is a partisan issue, so maybe you don't believe me because I'm a Republican. If you don't believe me, then perhaps you would believe President Jimmy Carter. Because President Jimmy Carter and former Secretary of State James Baker joined together in a bipartisan examination of voter fraud. A national commission, it was called the Carter-Baker Commission. Jimmy Carter obviously was a Democrat president of the United States. And the Carter-Baker Commission concluded voter fraud is real. They concluded that mail-in voting exacerbates voter fraud. They recommended photo ID to vote. And they pointed to ballot harvesting as the single worst practice for encouraging voter fraud. Sadly, the Democrats, it's almost as if they went down every recommendation of the Carter-Baker Commission and said, how do you reduce voter fraud? Let's reverse it and do more of that to get more voter fraud. That's why they oppose the Save America Act.
Senator Ted Cruz, Republican of Texas. I appreciate the time, sir. Thank you.
Thanks, Major.
Senior White House correspondent Ed O'Keefe joins me now from the White House. Ed, let me play for you some sound from the president today. Again, he used the word excursion to talk about the war with Iran. Please listen.
We had to do a little excursion, if you don't mind. A little excursion to take care of nuclear weaponry in the hands of maniacs. But other than that, in a couple of weeks, and won't be much longer, it's moving along fast. We're way ahead of schedule. Did you know that, Mr. Speaker? I'm trying to save a lot of money by being ahead of schedule.
Well, there we have it, Ed. A couple of weeks. That seems to me, at least for the moment, some specificity from the president about duration.
Well, and they had said 4 to 5 weeks, right? So we're about halfway, a little under halfway through that. But the fact that he now says weeks and that he's canceling postponing his trip to China, which was supposed to start March 31st, is a signal that they're trying to leave some breathing room there in the event it continues. So, an interesting series of pronouncements again today, defending and explaining his decision to do this, reiterating that while he's asked many other countries to participate in securing the Strait of Hormuz, if they don't come along, the United States will figure it out, and spent a great amount of time in his meeting with the Irish Taoiseach, the head of the Irish government that NATO and its viability is being questioned again by him if countries that are members of that alliance don't step up and assist. But remember, NATO, as conceived, is designed to deal with things north of the Middle East, chiefly Russia, the North Atlantic, not necessarily the Middle East. And you've seen several European leaders in the last few days say, if you need to build some kind of coalition to deal with this situation, NATO is not the vehicle. You'll have to come up with a new one. And the British and others have said, we'll look into whether or not it makes sense to be part of this. Other countries, especially in Asia, that rely much more on the petroleum coming from that part of the world, have said, we're looking into it. We haven't necessarily been formally asked. Remember, the Japanese are coming. The Prime Minister's coming later this week. Don't be surprised if we hear about some kind of commitment from her there. But excursion is an interesting choice of words, is it not, Major? Not war, not incursion, but excursion, trying to minimize in the minds of his coalition that's most skeptical of this, Tucker Carlson and others, as the senator mentioned, suggesting that this is merely something that's going to go on just a few weeks more, and we'll move on. We'll see.
And very quickly, Ed, yesterday the president was bidding for those to join us, allies, now saying we don't need you. And also, just to square the circle here, NATO is a defensive alliance. It is not an offensive alliance, which is a point many NATO members have made. Yeah.
And that's part of why this has been a struggle for him to try to convince other countries to get on board. And their message has been, we didn't ask for this war. We didn't start this war. You know, you can't just expect us to show up and assist. And obviously the president feels differently about that, arguing that the United States has been there for allies for so long, they should return the favor. But again, their argument is this isn't something we're necessarily beholden to help you with. And remember, their reliance on oil from that part of the world isn't as extensive or significant as it is, again, for Asian countries and for Australia and that part of the world, which we have not yet seen step up and suggest that they're willing to assist.
The alliance relationship, it does, in fact, go both ways. Ed O'Keefe at the White House. Thanks very much. So to come, we go to the touchscreen. Our national security analyst, Aaron McLean, standing by. Also, the average price of gas today, $3.82 a gallon. That is according to Gas Buddy. Diesel fuel, you know, the fuel that powers all of our home deliveries, top $5 a gallon. What does that mean for inflation? We preview a key Federal Reserve meeting. It's primary day in Illinois. We will look at Democratic infighting on issues from immigration to how to take on President Trump. The Takeout returns in 90 seconds. Welcome back to the Takeout. CBS News national security analyst Aaron McLean joins me now. He's also the host of School of War podcast. Aaron is at the touchscreen, and yes, we both got the clothing memo. So just to clear that up. All right. The importance for these segments is for me to ask short questions, you give long answers. Charlie Daggett talked about two significant Iranian regime figures eliminated. That's the Israeli term. What's the significance?
That's right. Ali Larijani and a gentleman named Soleimani, no relation to the Qasem Soleimani who was killed about 5 years ago, were hit, it seems, by the Israelis overnight in Tehran and sites in and around the city. These two gentlemen are very significant. Larijani had essentially supervision over the whole national security apparatus of Iran. Soleimani was in control of an organization called the Besieged, focused on internal repression. So their deaths are significant both because of who they were and what they controlled, but also, I think, because of how it reveals that the targeting process of the Israelis and the Americans is extraordinarily sophisticated and efficient compared to the state of things even 5 years ago.
Because we know they're hiding.
They're hiding.
This is a hot war. They're hiding. They're trying not to be killed. And the Israelis still kill them.
I strongly suspect that they're not using cell phones, that they're trying to stay out of view to the extent possible, though that's not entirely true of some senior regime officials who have been out and about in some pro-regime events in Tehran in recent days, leading some to speculate that maybe they got dimed out by people in Tehran to the Israelis. The Israelis are certainly promoting this impression for reasons that I think should be obvious.
Catch us up on the Strait of Hormuz and what is or isn't happening.
Well, you saw the news, and I just heard you discussing it with Senator Cruz about the president, his asks recently of NATO countries and other allies that they help us, his statement today that actually we don't need any help.
We don't need you.
I'm just going to restrict myself to the observation that some help would be valuable, because getting ships through here on the assumption that an escort operation is in the offing is going to be resource intensive. intensive. This space is so constricted that you need your escort ships to be pretty close to the ships they're escorting. When we did this, the United States did this in the 1980s, by the way, with British and French assistance. We had dozens of ships involved at any given time. The more escorts you have, the faster your operation will go, the more ships you'll get through the strait.
And what is the possibility, because Senator Cruz surprised me by saying, I can imagine a short-term, boots-on-the-ground military action in Iran. President hasn't talked about that at all. But if that were to happen, let's say at the Karg Island or something, what might that look like and who might be involved?
Yeah, you know, I've paid careful attention not only to the president's statements, but also Secretary of War Pete Hegseth, others in the administration. No one has said explicitly that this or that operation is going to occur, but they have all been pretty careful to rule out boots on the ground, or excuse me, not to rule out boots on the ground as a general rule going forward. Not because I think we can anticipate a 2001 in Afghanistan or 2003 in Iraq type situation. Those kinds of forces aren't even in the region, so it's not practically possible right now. But you mentioned Karg Island. I do think that's one potential target for a raid, which I'll talk about. There's another with the nuclear sites. Karg Island is this very small but very significant piece of terrain out here in the Persian Gulf through which effectively all of Iran's energy exports go through. Now, this
President Trump keeps referring to the pipes.
The pipes, that's right, that's pipes. The pipes come to here, and the materials get on the ships from here. This is not a big place. It's maybe 4 to 6 miles north to south, just a couple miles wide. You could jog from one end to the other without too much trouble. I could absolutely envision in the way President Trump sort of thinks about the world, I see the appeal of seizing a piece of terrain like this just to have the boot on the neck of the Iranian economy, which would absolutely be the consequence.
That would be something involving Marines in all likelihood.
Yeah, the kind of Marine unit that's moving to the region is the kind of force you would contemplate playing some kind of role in this, in addition to special operations troops. The other, I think, raid that you hear a lot of discussion about in the broader discussion about the war is a raid targeting nuclear materials at the remaining nuclear sites. So Isfahan is marked here on the map. There's potentially a couple of others we would consider. This would be an extraordinarily bold and ambitious gambit to go in and get that highly enriched uranium that's underground, potentially take it out, potentially destroy it, or somehow mitigate it in place. You can see some of the distances involved here. That's about 1,000 miles from the Gulf of Oman up here to Isfahan. It's no closer out to Jordan or Israel, where we have substantial forces, a little bit closer to Kuwait. This would be one of the most ambitious special operations missions in American history.
And they all carry risks. Aaron McLean, appreciate it.
Thanks
very much. Coming up, we'll tell you about key races to watch in the Illinois primary, which is going on right now. Results later tonight. You're watching The Takeout. Welcome back. It's primary day in Illinois, and our next guest is someone I used to, many years ago, I won't say exactly how many years ago, used to cover Congress with, Lynn Sweet. When anyone had a question about the contours and the nitty-gritty of Illinois politics, we turned to Lynn Sweet. She joins me now. She is a special correspondent for Chicago Public Media. Lynn, it's great to see you. Thanks for joining us. It's a big night in Illinois. There's lots of Democratic infighting. Tell me what races you're watching and why.
Well, this is unprecedented in a few ways, including the number of open seats we have for Congress. We have 5 open seats in the House, of which 4 are in play in this primary. And of course, we have Dick Durbin's Senate seat. So these seats are rarely open, maybe once in a generation, because in Illinois, at least, and this is true for Republicans and Democrats, except if you're in a remap and you're thrown against an incumbent major, you get these seats and you just stay put. So people, if you're going to take your shot, this was the time to take it. And that's why we have so many candidates and there's so much competition going on and a ton of TV ads.
Talk about the Senate race to replace Dick Durbin, an institution. So it has been generationally Dick Durbin's seat for a long time. Now it's wide open, lots of money, and something on the line for the sitting governor, J.B. Pritzker.
Right. Here's why. The lieutenant governor candidate, Juliana Stratton, it has been Pritzker's running mate. He put millions into a super PAC to support her. Plus, we have 2 incumbent members of the House who are running, Robin Kelly and Raja Krishnamurti. So it's been a 3-way race almost from the beginning. Others are running because this is a rarely open seat. But frankly, it's always been about these 3. Interesting. 2 Black women and Raja, who, if elected, would be the first Indian American member of the Senate. So it shows that you have a lot of these dynamics in play. You also have the usual things: two women running against each other, one guy. So the paths haven't been as obvious, and there's not a ton of policy. The policy differences are very thin between them. So, and sometimes on a national show, Major, you may talk about a fight for the soul of the Democratic Party. This one isn't. It's kind of a fight to see who says they could be the bigger fighter against Trump, especially between Stratton and Roger Krishnamurti. The negative ads against each other have been brutal, both on their behalf and super PACs.
In Illinois, there are two prominent political families, the Jackson family and the Obama family. Have either weighed in on the Senate race?
No. Obama has not endorsed. I would have been very surprised if he had, though, that everybody would like to say that they're close to Obama. But when you talk about Jackson, you're talking about in the race to replace Robin Kelly, former Congressman Jesse Jackson Jr. is making a redemption run. You might remember, all our listeners, that he pled guilty to charges of looting his campaign fund. He served prison time, and now we don't know what kind of bump he may get because of his father's death on February 17. His brother, Jonathan, represents an adjoining district. Donna Miller, a former Cook County board member, has been making a really strong run, but we don't know if the dynamics change at the last minute because of the Reverend's passing.
We got 1 minute left, Lynn. Based on what you're seeing so far today, is there any sign that this energy, Democratic energy, meaning showing up to vote, that we've seen in other states, is showing up today in Illinois?
Well, because we're a blue state, I know everybody read a lot of tea leaves in Texas when they had that massive turnout. Because of all the negative ads, who knows, it may depress turnout. We know a little bit about the city, that older people are voting in bigger numbers than younger ones, and and more women are voting than men. That's what we know so far for this city. But things to watch out as you look ahead in races across the country, Major: the role of outside money from the crypto industry, the AI industry, and from APAC, all factors to look at, because collectively they've poured millions of dollars into these contests.
Tens of millions into Illinois politics for all those races and all those reasons you just outlined. Lynn Sweet, it's a pleasure. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Coming up, just how high will gas and oil prices go? You don't know the answer, I don't know the answer, but lots of people are nervous. We're going to talk about that and the potential economic domino effect next here on The Takeout. Welcome back. Since the war with Iran began, gas prices up 27%, diesel up 34%. So what effect will this have on the economy? Well, we're going to turn to Justin Wolfers, who's going to tell us about that. He calls me mate, which he has full permission to do in every interview we do. So, Justin, you and I know the answer to that question.
Yes.
You and I know the answer to that question, because before the war started, you heard the president say it, I heard the president say it. When fuel prices go down, everything goes down with it. Well, the opposite must also be true.
I've got a different piece of advice for you, Garrett. Don't listen to him then, and then you won't have to listen to him now either.
You can call me
if
Major,
someone doesn't
too.
tell you the truth, you don't have to listen to him. So, look, you just said, gas prices are up about 30%. Well, bad news, oil prices are up about 60%. That means we're only halfway there with what's going to happen to gas prices overall. But that's not really the whole story. Goldman Sachs is out with a note a couple of days ago, sort of revising all of their forecasts in light of the Iran war. And what they're saying is that we could expect another 250,000 people to join the ranks of the unemployed. We can expect economic growth to slow. And by my calculation, an economic cost that will be measured in the hundreds of billions. If you took Goldman's numbers seriously, roughly around about $200 billion. So this is a really big deal.
And what would we attribute those job losses that you just summarized from the Goldman Sachs note to? Where would they come from that wouldn't have been there before?
Yeah. So there's actually a few ways forward. One is oil. Oil is a big input into everything, and you're making something more expensive. Another part of it is a rise in geopolitical risk. The world is not the safe place that it was a year ago. And then going with that, a rise in uncertainty. And there's also a sense that oil price hikes are have an even larger effect when geopolitical strife goes with it. Look, here's the basic question. If you're thinking about expanding your factory or opening a new outlet or starting a new business right now, you've always got the option of waiting a few months to see how reality shapes out. And in a moment like this, that starts to feel like an even better and better bet. And so that means that new businesses get stopped, new investment gets stopped, new hiring gets stopped, and that's how you slow an economy.
What does this mean for the Federal Reserve?
Look, that's a very complicated question. Let me explain the simple, then the complicated version. The simple version is this is going to cause higher inflation, and that normally leads the Fed to raise rates. It's also going to cause higher unemployment. That normally leads the Fed to lower rates. That's why people say it's a dilemma. Now, actually, if you study a little more economics, we complicate things a bit. We distinguish between a demand shock, too many people want to buy too much stuff, and a supply shock. It became harder to produce stuff cost effectively. This is a supply shock. And the way a supply shock is meant to work is the price of oil goes up, the price of a lot of other things go up. Inflation occurs while those price rises are happening. But once we get to those new prices, there's no reason for them to continue rising. Let me say that in English. A supply shock is meant to have a transitory effect on inflation. Now, we all got scared of the word transitory because transitory during the pandemic meant a few years. But as a result, if you think that inflation might come down on its own, then maybe the Fed should respond less to that inflation shock and more to the reality that we already have a slowing economy and it might be about to slow even more.
So, in English, that means the Fed faces a dilemma. You can't predict their behavior any more than I can predict their behavior. And that adds to what you mentioned a few moments ago, which is this thing that harshes everyone's mellow, to use real English, uncertainty.
Yeah. I think I want to actually vote for changing the word from uncertainty to disruption. It's easy to say that the president has created a lot of uncertainty, but really what he's done is created a lot of disruption. Uncertainty is the sort of thing where you can wait it out and see what's happening. Disruption is he's smashing things down and we don't really know what will come out in the wash as a result. I actually think that the agenda, not specific things about monetary or fiscal policy, but the broader agenda of what might be called the authoritarian turn of invading countries when he feels like it, starting trade wars when he feels like it, doing so without Congress, doing so without allies, doing so without making the case to the American people. Look, if I told you there was a bloke out there who started an insurrection one year, the next year next couple of years started a trade war, and the next year started a war in Iran, without congressional approval, you might think to yourself, well, I wonder what this bloke's going to do next year.
Disruption indeed. Justin Wolfers, I appreciate the time, sir. Thank you. Our political panel is next. We will hit all the headlines, including that intense primary going on, not in Illinois. We already covered that, but in Maine. That's next. You're watching The Takeout. Political panel time, isn't it exciting? Joining me now, Republican strategist and president of Advancing American Freedom, Tim Chapman, and Democratic strategist Jaime Moore. I want to play sound for you from the president today about Iran and the war. Please listen.
We have to put out this cancer. It's a cancer. We had to take that operation, and we did, and it was very successful. And it continues. Frankly, as somebody said, they could leave today, and it would take 10 years to rebuild the damage that's been done. But I think we have to make it a little bit more permanent because no other president has to go through this.
How do you translate that, Tim, in terms of what Americans listening to that might think of a timeline? Because also at that same event, the president said 2 or 3 more weeks.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think the timeline is until the job's done. I think the president.
How do we define that?
Completely defanging the regime. I mean, they need to have no missile capability. They need to not be able to cause trouble in the region anymore. And the president's committed to that. I think that's really important. And look, I think we have to have a little bit of patience. Everyone's clamoring for an end game here. Mm-hmm. But the end game is not complicated. They cannot disrupt the Middle East the way they've been doing it.
And that means a different regime.
It doesn't have to mean a different regime.
Okay.
It means a regime that no longer is capable of doing what it's done up until this point.
I don't know if you had a chance to hear Senator Ted Cruz on the program, but he said he wouldn't rule out boots on the ground if it was short and for a defined mission. Seems like there is encroaching rhetoric in that direction.
Yeah, I mean, look, that is definitely moving the goalposts a little bit. And I don't think the American people are up for that. Yeah. I don't think the president's pushing for that. I don't think the administration wants that. But I think that the administration feels like they can do the job right now through air power, through working with the Israelis, and they can find a way to do enough damage and then leave. And once you do that, like, look, if it doesn't matter who's in power at the end of the day, it matters that they cannot inflict this damage on the region and on the American people anymore.
Lindsey Graham would probably not agree with that, but that's just one voice in the Senate. Jaime, your perspective.
Look, I mean, I agree with some of what my colleague is saying, and I think at the end of the day, the president has told the American people that there are a couple reasons why he's out there doing these strikes and engaging in this conflict. And I think majority of Americans believe him. But here's what the question is right now. To your point, will Americans stomach putting boots on the ground? I don't think so. 2, do Americans want to see an end game? Yes. Nobody wants to see a protracted war. And so what Democrats are doing right now is they are both presenting themselves as the opposition party, but they're also making sure that they're keeping their finger on the pulse of this of this conflict, because we're in the middle of the midterms right now. And so you have a lot of things that the Democrats are wanting to talk about, but this war is giving them even more fodder for their conversation on affordability. What they're saying now is the president's spending so much time outside of America that he has no time to lower costs. And I think that's going to be a salient message.
One of the iron rules here, and there are not many, but one of the ones is if I pitch it before we go to break, we have to talk about it when we come back from break. So I mentioned Maine.
Yeah.
Graham Plattner, Janet Mills. Janet Mills is the sitting governor.
Correct.
She's the favor of the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee and a lot of the institutional sort of investors, funders of the Democratic Party. Graham Plattner is the insurgent. And now they're getting bitterly involved with one another. Jaime, break this down for us.
Well, look, this is going to be a primary to watch regardless. So you have someone who is...
Because Susan Collins, the Republican, is perceived as vulnerable.
She's perceived as vulnerable. And so you have 2 Democrats who are running their hearts out right now. So Graham Plattner, who is an insurgent candidate and who represents some of the progressive wing of this party, and then the incumbent governor, Janet Mills, who, and some people have said she's a little too old. But this ad she put out today, what she's trying to prove is that she's a fighter. And so if she can prove that she's a fighter, in some ways I think she can eke Graham Plattner out and emerge as the nominee. I think she and some Democrats have agreed over the last few weeks that she will be the stronger opposition against Susan Collins.
Tim?
Look, what you see in Maine, you're seeing across the entire country, okay? In both parties. You're seeing anti-establishment candidates going up against establishment candidates. And there's a real tension there. And I think it's...
Some of that's happening in Illinois, too.
It's happening across... And it's not, again, not just the Democrats. This is across the board. But here's the problem. The problem is the anti-establishment candidate right now in Maine is so on the fringe. I mean, he's dabbling in anti-Semitism and all sorts of conspiracy theories. It's a real problem. And the Democratic Party needs to jettison that as quickly as possible if they want to be electable in 2028. The Republican Party has their own problem. And there are a lot of nefarious forces that are trying to impact both parties right now and trying to inject this kind of thinking into both parties. What I'm happy about right now in the Republican Party is I see a lot of Republicans, including the administration, finally beginning to take that seriously and trying to push those elements out of the party.
And to your point, you heard Senator Ted Cruz talk about that on the program earlier, name-checking at least Tucker Carlson, but those who are like Tucker Carlson in criticizing this particular military campaign launched by the president. Tim, it's been great to have you at the table. Please come back. Jaime, you're always welcome here. Thanks so much. Happy Tuesday, everyone. This is The Takeout. You know what we are. Quick reminder, relentlessly curious, reliably civil, occasionally clever. The Day Report coming your way next.